Okay, hello, good morning, and from me, it's a particular hello to Mohammed Al Suwaidi in Cairo, to Liam Smith in London, who are our panelists, and I'm going to hand over later to my old friend Khalid Nasir, who will do an introduction from Cairo as well. You are in Cairo, Khalid, are you not?
Yes, I'm in Cairo. I'm actually in Sadat City, as you saw.
Okay. All right. We're all getting very used to this as the new way of working and everything else. So first of all, ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for joining us today for this session. I think this can be particularly interesting because the UK is clearly, a lot of us listening from the UK. We have a number of our challenges. Our government has been facing a lot of pressure for what it's been doing in terms of the health service and everything else. But there's a lot of good things still happening in terms of business. I'm the chairman of the Egyptian British Chamber of Commerce, and Khalid in Cairo is from the British Egyptian Business Association. He chairs that. And we work closely between the two organisations for bilateral trade and investment. Someone's got a little bit of noise going on in the background. I think it may be my voice echoing. So it'd be good if we're on mute if we're not actually speaking. So today we're going to get a chance to hear from the British Chambers of Commerce and from the Federation of Egyptian Industries, so that we can understand what's happening in the two countries. And there will be a brief introduction from both speakers, and then we'll be open to questions generally. We were going to be joined today by Ambassador Tariq Adel, the Egyptian ambassador to the UK, but he was unable to come at short notice. He has sent a message that he has asked me to read out. These are indeed extraordinary times, but nevertheless, an opportunity to embrace our common humanity and collaborate to identify mutual challenges as well as potential opportunities to overcome these challenges is a good thing. With the outbreak of the COVID-19 pandemic, the Egyptian government has moved quickly and assertively with an integrated approach to address the current crisis. It has introduced a broad set of policy measures to provide social protection, especially to the poor and vulnerable, to maintain financial resilience and to protect jobs and incomes, and to maintain the economic activity. A very difficult task indeed, but they are committed to fulfill this. The government, the Egyptian government this is also committed to supporting the business sector to mitigate COVID-19 implications through sector-specific measures, and the national institutions are pushing the frontiers of cooperation and coordination with all business partners to overcome any obstacles that may arise. Over the past couple of months, both the Egyptian and British governments have worked closely, and that has been to alleviate the negative implications of COVID-19 and maintain business and trade flow. Recently, the Egyptian government has granted a waiver to exports of crucial PPE for the UK's NHS, and the last batch of 300,000 surgical gowns reached the UK last week. I think I would add at this point, it would appear that the Egyptian gowns have actually passed the quality test to get in, unlike some of those from another country in the Eastern Mediterranean. So yes, the gowns turned up in the UK last week, and for its part, the UK is coordinating with British businesses to provide some of the immediate medical needs of Egypt, as well as supporting the Egyptian efforts of fighting COVID-19 across the three dimensions of health, economic and the social aspects. The ambassador is saying that he's very much looking forward to today's discussions, and including cases of business trade disruptions caused by COVID-19, and committed to support all business partners in navigating through these uncharted waters. So thank you, Ambassador Tariq, for sending us these words and the introduction. And by and large, I think in what he said anything that I would say. What I'm hoping we will see out of today's session is an understanding, a better understanding from both sides of what's happening in the two countries. What we try to do between BIBA and ourselves and the Egyptian British Chamber of Commerce is actually to create a window into the other countries that, for those of you sitting in Cairo, you will get some insight into what's happening in the UK. And for those of us in the UK, then here is a window into what's happening in Cairo. Clearly, we tend to be relatively focused as bilateral organisations, and it's particularly good. We have today both Mohammed in Cairo and Liam Smythe representing the British Chambers of Commerce, which clearly is completely international and multi-sector approach. So without further ado, I'd like to hand over to Khaled in Cairo, probably for a few words of welcome, and for you to introduce Mohammed. And I'm hoping that Mohammed will give us sort of just a quick brief overview from Cairo, and then I will introduce Liam to give us an overview from the UK, and then we can open up the discussion to those who are on this call. The practical ways of dealing with this, I think most of you have probably become quite expert at using Zoom on this. There is an opportunity to raise your hand if you want to speak at a later point. You'll be muted whilst clearly other people are speaking. And there's also the chat facility whereby you can raise questions going through. So as the moderator of the panel, I will try and pick up and make sure we cover those things. So I hope we've covered all the housekeeping issues, and hand over to Khaled in Cairo.
Thank you very much, Ian. Ladies and gentlemen, distinguished guests, it's with pleasure that I welcome you to this webinar organized by BIBA and the EBBC. Today's discussion is on the effect of COVID-19 on the bilateral trade between Egypt and the UK, bilateral business and bilateral investments, and to shed some light on how we can expedite the recovery and how the recovery can be foreseen. At these disruptive times, everybody has questions. Everybody is wondering what's coming tomorrow. So I believe our two distinguished guests today could help us shed some light on what to expect and what is really going on the other side, as Ian has mentioned. I'm honored to welcome the speaker representing the Egyptian side, Mr. Engineer Mohammed El-Suidi, Chairman of the Federation of Egyptian Industry. Mohammed Suidi has been the chairman of the FEI since 2013. He's also been a member of the Egyptian Parliament since 2016. The Federation of Egyptian Industries, through a network of 20 chambers, each representing an industrial sector, supports all businesses that operate in Egypt's industrial sector by providing operational guidance and by lobbying to ensure the growth of its member companies. It's also worth remembering that Mr. El-Suidi was also heading the coalition of parties in the parliament, the pro-government coalition of supporting the government. We welcome him, and we always looking forward to his opinion. I will now leave the floor to my friend Ian Gray, Chairman of the Egyptian British Chamber of Commerce, to introduce Ambassador Mr. Liam Smith, our other distinguished speaker from the UK.
Once I've unmuted myself. Thank you, Khaled. Liam is the Director of Trade and Facilitation at the British Chambers of Commerce. And in the UK, the trade bodies have actually been quite influential in dealing with the government. And Liam is at the forefront of this because he engages with the government on trade policy and represents the British Chamber of Commerce on a number of working groups. So on behalf of British businesses, Liam, thank you for the work you're doing. And I think, if I may, in particular, from the smaller and medium-sized businesses who are all members of the Chambers of Commerce. Certainly my own experience is that the largest companies tend to have a big voice and tend not to necessarily come through on the Chambers, and it's the mid-sized businesses that we're going to be relying on to bounce back and recover from this. So Liam, thank you very much for joining us today. If I may, could I ask perhaps you, Liam, then to open for us and tell both the UK people who don't know what all you've been working on and your perspective, and importantly to our visitors from Cairo here today, what you can tell us about the what all's going on in UK business. I understand you've got some slides that you want to share with us.
I do, Ian. Thank you very much for the introduction, and it's a pleasure to meet with colleagues from across in Egypt, and I look forward to hearing Mr. Sawidi's presentation on the situation there. I'm going to now try and share my screen with some hope that will happen. Are you seeing my screen just yet, or not? I'm not confident you are.
We have the screen, but we got the PowerPoint with the slides down the side as well.
Ah, okay. Let me just try something else then, and let me. I have to work between two screens here.
PowerPoint onto full screen, I think.
Yes, I think
that's good.
Good. Okay, so thank you very much. We can move, I think, straight on to slide number 2. So these are the areas that I intend to cover. It's reflected in the invitation to this meeting. So I want to give you an update on the support available to businesses in the UK and the work that we've done in that regard. Also, a bit of a view on the macroeconomic impact on trade and industry in the short and medium term, because not only are, of course, we dealing with COVID and end of our transition period with the EU on 31st of December and a new independent trade policy from 1st of January 2021, which is some 7 months away of time for businesses to prepare and get ready for that change. And then I'll try best I can to project our path towards economic recovery and the kinds of things that we believe that businesses should be thinking about right now, and indeed what our government should be considering right now. So short-term gains, so I'll call this short-term gains. Gains because actually this is the work that we've been engaged in for the last sort of 7 or 8 weeks since the start of COVID really impacting the UK and prior to lockdown, where we really were saying to government, you know, cash is king. We need to inject cash into the system when the lockdown happens, should that happen. We have to have a priority of protecting jobs and also of maintaining our traders' position in the supply chain, either as an exporter or indeed as an importer, thinking about the component parts coming to the UK and leaving the UK and ending up being finished products. We'd have to say that we would take our hat off to the government in terms of its speed of reaction, and I think we can also recognise in the UK that we've seen support from the official opposition and other parties in Parliament for the government's approach and speed of reacting to the lockdown in terms of the support that it's given to business. And we, of course, were part of a group of organisations that were able to contribute to the early thinking on what that scheme might look like to became the job retention scheme, the furlough scheme, commonly known as the furlough scheme. But actually that scheme has I can tell you up to our research that we do weekly on COVID impacts, there's around 70% of companies having furloughed people so far. And of those that have furloughed, 75% of those businesses are reporting that they have already received the cash injection from government. So that speed of reaction has been really important for traders in the UK, and it would evidently appear to be working very, very well. Another area that we talked to government about was not just injecting cash, but actually it's stalling the time when cash would come to government in the form of taxes. And indeed, the HMRC have had a number of iterations of a time to pay scheme that started with time to pay your quarterly VAT account and is now extended out to time to pay on import tax and duties for goods arriving to the UK, in order, of course, that those goods arriving in the UK are in the right place at the factories, ready to be utilised and to be made into finished products when companies get back to work. And of course, we now have the news this weekend of a change in policy from government that is allowing and encouraging people who can't work from home to start to think about going back to work, and for companies to be ready for that change. And also, you know, for people who can work from home, like I can, to work from home and to stay off of public transport. So those time to pay measures have really helped to keep cash in companies and to pump prime that. Another switch that we've seen is for electronically signed and stamped documents and certificates. And this is work that we've been engaged in across the globe with countries such as Saudi Arabia, who would typically insist on a wet signed and wet stamped certificate of origin, as well as other wet signed and wet stamped documentation for exports leaving the UK. And so a number of countries have already agreed, Mexico, Switzerland, Saudi Arabia, Qatar, to name but a few, have with work between the Department of International Trade here and ourselves and our missions abroad, been able to resolve a high volume of these wet stamped documents to be able to be transmitted electronically during this crisis. And then the final area I'll mention in relation to trade and the trade of goods is warehousing. And we've very quickly seen customs warehousing fill up in the UK as goods couldn't be delivered to factories that were closed. And in fact, the government has made some moves to classify some large areas of land, such as disused airports, into warehousing space on a temporary basis. And being able to respond in that way, which is all helping to make sure goods are in the right place at the right time. Let me just move on. What's happening here? Yeah. So those are the previous are the gains, the things that have happened already. I now want to talk about the short-term asks that we have of government. These are the things that they've not yet done, but we need them to do. And in fact, as recently as this morning, we've addressed number 2 in this ask. So already I have a success to report even since yesterday. So, but the first one is postponed VAT accounting. So at the moment, the government offers time to pay on goods, on the VAT and duty on goods arriving in the UK at the UK frontier. However, each company has to individually apply for that time to pay, and that takes time and effort, and it takes some days to respond. We campaigned for and achieved a change to the VAT accounting of imported goods at the end of the transition period. So our Chancellor of the Exchequer has already announced that from the 1st of January 21, all goods arriving in the UK from anywhere in the world will be able to benefit from postponed VAT accounting. So the VAT will be calculated at the point of entry, but not paid until the future VAT return. We think that the government ought to introduce this immediately, and so we continue to campaign for this change that has a zero effect in terms of the revenues taken by the government, on imported goods, but gives time to pay for the businesses concerned. And also it places import VAT in the same space as all other VAT collected by the Treasury, in that it's recorded at the time of being imposed, but it's collected later. We were also asking for a solution for the government to back a trade credit insurance scheme. This case number that I cite here was the German government's request to the European Union for a similar kind of scheme that was approved in its exclusion from state aid rules. In fact, the government announced that on the stock exchange at 7 AM this morning that it would in fact put in place a trade credit insurance scheme for all traders in the UK to be able to back that scheme, and they have said that the scheme in its entirety will be announced by the end of the month. So this is a big win for the Chamber network here in citing, if you like, something that maybe other trade organisations wouldn't see, because they don't, whilst they may drive policy in relation to international trade and trade generally, they're not cited on the nuances of trade and things like the trade credit insurance impact, because frankly some insurers were withdrawing their insurance services on some goods moving out of the UK because of COVID. So we really needed the government to step in and back those trades, and they've done so. So that's good. The other thing we need is more air cargo. Passenger planes have stopped flying. Therefore, the bellies of those planes cannot be utilised for cargo in and out of our respective countries. And so we need more air cargo. In the absence of passenger flights, we really need our respective governments to work together to find ways of placing more capacity into the marketplace, because the cost of air cargo has really skyrocketed, and also there's the imposition of some supplementary charges at airports because they are also so quiet in the UK. So we need really the government to pump prime air cargo capacity, because there are some goods that just cannot go by sea. It takes too long. They can't go by truck. It takes too long. They need to go by air to sustain those businesses on both sides of that air routes. And frankly, we think we need much clearer messaging from government. And what I mean by that is that our population is confused. We're having differences between England, Scotland, Wales, and Northern Ireland in terms of messaging about the end of lockdown. And further, we have change of government policy that the public are saying they find confusing. Should I return to work? Should I not return to work? So we really need much more clarity from government on what they mean when they make bold statements. And finally, we've produced a policy document for government, which we sent into government last Friday, on these three themes of restart, rebuild, and renew. And we continue to engage with our chamber network on what restart looks like, what rebuild looks like, and what the renewal of our economies looks like. And so we'll continue to work with government on in highlighting what those issues are. In terms of medium term, define this medium term as by the 1st of January 21. For the UK trade, we need a good deal with the EU. We can maybe go into later what a good deal looks like, but many people have many opinions. But the government's stated aim is that we will end our transition period with the European Union on the 31st of December and have an independent trade policy by 1st of January. Therefore, we need a good deal with the EU. And I should probably add to that, well, I've got it in number 2, is the rollover of the EU trade agreements for the UK, of course, including the trade agreement between the EU currently and Egypt that we benefit from, that partnership arrangement, and the EU deal is very, very good for UK-Egyptian trade. And so we need the ongoing discussions that are taking place between our two governments to continue and to reach a positive outcome in a fairly short space of time, of course, because we only have some months left in this year. We also need clarity on the trade tariff, the UK trade tariff, which is so far remains unpublished, although there is some indication of what that might look like. But for traders to be ready, they need to know what they're dealing with. And we need that to be backed up by real consultation with business. We need trust between government and the business groups. We need a sharing of that intended trade policy, and those trade negotiations currently just opened today for with Japan, a consultation. Last week with the US, we expect Australia, New Zealand and some others to come forward. But we really need to be able to scenario plan and to look at what the impact is of our new independent trade policy on traders today and the supply lines that they are engaged in right now. And finally, we need new funding for the employment and training of customs agents. I say it's a crisis waiting here because as an independent customs area outside of the EU, the number of customs declarations that UK trade will need to make rises from 55 million per annum today to some 300 million at the end of the transition period. And this is because, of course, in addition to those declarations made with the rest of the world, non-EU countries today, we need declarations to be made for all transactions with the EU, who are a substantial trade partner and account for just over half of our trade. So that's a huge impact, and so far we have really just not had enough activity from customs intermediaries to grow their business, their employment. Our Chancellor of the Duchy of Lancaster, Michael Gove, has said we need 50,000 more people making customs declarations and acting as customs agents. It looks like we've got 7 months to do a massive recruitment drive there, but that will only happen with the government's backing and funding. Longer term, we would say we need a clear protocol for consulting and the rollout of new future trade agreements and free trade agreements, with a big focus, we would say, on utilisation of those agreements. So if we have a partnership agreement with Egypt, we need that to be animated. We need businesses to understand what it is and how they take full advantage of that, so that we can encourage trade between the countries in which we have developed trade partnerships. Therefore, we need a responsive government where a future trade policy isn't working, or is acting, or there are barriers to trade taking place. We need them to be responsive to those trade barriers. And we would say, of course, that we need to embed the international currency of certificates of origin as the method to determine origin. This is well regarded. It's the system we've operated for 100 years. And in fact, I would say the risk to that being the case is the Trade Facilitation Agreement of the World Trade Organization, which actually makes no mention of certificates of origin in future trade policy. It simply says two things. One is that origin can be declared by the exporter on invoice, but the proof of origin responsibility lies with the importer. Now, quite how an importer can prove origin once the goods have arrived from an exporter without having the background data and evidence, I don't quite understand. So we are lobbying both at UK government and at WTO level through our connections with the international chambers of commerce to embed certificates of origin. And this hyperlink, Karen will, I'm sure, help in sending these slides to you, but that hyperlink takes you to a study from the UK Trade Policy Office in January 2018, where the piece of research with traders showed that actually traders are interested in certificates of origin for a range of reasons, not simply to export goods or to have them imported under free trade agreements, but for a whole range of reasons that are to do with letters of credit, bank security and financial mechanisms. And of course, we need electronic and mechanical signatures accepted on all future trade agreements that we reach for preference as well. It seems absurd that countries still insist, and many countries still insist on a wet written, handwritten signature on a document that is for where many other documents are transmitted electronically. And so we need our future trade policy and preferences to be to allow electronic transmission. People talk of blockchain. We're about 3 steps below blockchain in this regard. And finally, we need a roadmap for the recovery of trade, of course, including partnership agreements and trade agreements. But actually, that's also about the shape of our ports in the future, our border agencies, how we transmit goods across our frontiers to the rest of the world and vice versa. So the shape and the design of our borders post 1st of January is going to be really critically important, that we have some best-in-class solutions to allow trade to flow freely, and of course to reduce the amount of red tape and friction at our respective borders. Thank you for your attention. I hope that's been useful, maybe even interesting, and may also elicit some questions later. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. If we may, we won't take questions on Liam now. We'll go on to Mohammed Al-Suwaidi here from Egypt. So I think we need you to stop. Thank you. We're going to stop sharing, Liam. And when we do get to the questions, I have been corrected as that it's not the chat button vote, it's the Q&A button when we get there. So if we may, if I could hand over to Mohammed Al-Suwaidi, if you could give us the view from Cairo, please, Mohammed.
Well, thank you very much, and hi everybody, and I'm really glad to hear what as the British government have done based on what happened due to coronavirus. To be operating more due to the lack of and shortage of some of the products coming into Egypt because of course shipping. Some of the companies has been closed down, especially in Europe. So we need to produce more supplies and take more action, and that was the government has been encouraging the companies to deal in by also taking the correct actions how to protect the labor working in the fields. But was really interesting what the central bank has done to the market, that by reduction of the interest rate by 3% immediately, and giving 6 months of grace period for the all due payments for all sectors, even for the private sector, without any penalties. For that, also, they had raised the level of leverage for the companies and private sector to use as what we call electronic trading and all that. For the tourism sector, to support keeping the labor as is, paying for the labor to not stay at work, but not to leave them without jobs. And that was very interesting from the central bank. It was almost £50 billion only to support the private sector and in tourism sector. Also funding even the renewable of some of the hotels to make use of this time that they won't find any jobs, so they will upgrade what they're having already right now. Also, they gave funds for the companies to as short term to cover funding for the parts, for the raw materials to keep business running. Even for some companies, there was the rules of the loosened rules of the central bank to that the company is running. And they actually, this was very impressive from the central bank, the speed of action done, and they gave the industry sector and the agro sector a fund of 100 billion pounds by special interest rate, very small interest rate, to keep running and to keep moving and not stop any action. Without what we saw, that I think any country, they have to look what they can supply locally, because we cannot stand any more shortage of supplies from some materials that we've seen during the COVID time. So that was very immediate actions from the central bank, plus also accepting all electronic or online meetings. That wasn't in the books of the central bank and not in the banks even. Now they will accept legally that online meeting recorded, they will take it and approve it. And this will goes on now even for the private sector companies. The online meetings recorded with the government, with the private sector, that's also approved right now. And then the government itself, they also took very quick actions by reduction of cost for electricity cost, for the natural gas prices. All this has been taken action immediately. Some of the laws, some of the actions that has been done, for example, at the customs, at approving the products and all that, sometimes we had complaints about bureaucracy. But the government has took quick actions to make things move quicker. As it has been said before, for example, stamping of documents from embassies and all that, and everything was closed. So they made it go through and accepted, for example, products without stamping these documents and all that. They renewed the export councils for the Ministry of Industry, because the main concern now is how to keep running and to keep exporting, because you have to keep the flow of foreign currency to the government, to the country as is. And this is one of our main concerns. So they're really supporting the private sector to export more. Also, I think having loans right now already approved by $2.7 billion coming to the country. So this make us feel safe that will not have any shortage of foreign currency to cover the shortage happening from the tourism sector, which is a very big sector, of course, and to keep business on running. The tax authority has gave 3-month payment facilities for all companies to pay, because in Egypt, I think it's different than Europe. We have to pay at the end of April. So they said, okay, we'll make it on 3-month installments for all companies, regardless of what the situation is. And that's also a very big move. So the central bank has already made very quick actions. The government is taking very quick actions. Also, the president himself made a bill of 100 billion pounds to support needed sectors with this money, especially that we have what we call it seasonal labor. And this is something, we don't see it in the industry, but we see it, for example, in the construction company, in tourism company, agriculture companies. So there is this, they will cover and support these families monthly until things get moving. Also, there was lots of due amounts for companies happening from export subsidies and happening from any other relation between companies and the government. The government is paying it already right now, and even make it more easily from the documents that they have to support, or some legalization that they have to go through. Now they're paying all the money, not all, but most of the money, even the dues for construction companies, especially to keep the market moving. And actually, you can feel it in some sectors. Yes, the market is getting back in the industry and agribusiness, but still we have a bit worry about the services, but not all services still is in operation back. We expect, we're in the middle of Ramadan, and we expect after our feast, which is coming in 10 days time, I think the government will start opening some of these local facilities again, and will be running not normally, but just to keep families living, to keep things of this part of this sector living. But actually, I think the government is taking, and we as private sectors, we can see it going in a better way. The government is listening every week, at least twice a week, with different sectors, what's needed to keep running, what's needed to make a gain of this COVID-19, especially for the foreign companies, to keep them here, to keep them invest more, and for local companies also to use most of the local facilities, which means that the government will start implementing the law number 5, which gives in tenders and in local in government purchasing a certain percentage, which is till 15% for all local produced with 40% added value, and this I think will support more localization and the more industry here in the country. Last thing, that they also made the new law for mining sector, which is a very, very big sector in Egypt, which is not still utilized. I think that the mining sector in Egypt makes almost 5% of utilization, which means lots of foreign companies need to attract them more, and this will also can cover some of the shortage of foreign currency which will happen from the tourism sector, which I think, in my opinion, will not be back to normal for 1 year from what we're talking. I hope from 1 year from now, here we have this special vaccine or the special agreements that will be done to cover this sector. I don't want to go long for explain what's happening and what's going on, but we as business sector were really glad to see the Egyptian government moving that fast, moving that efficient, even by the number of people affected and number of death rate were on the safe side. Till now, don't forget that Egypt is 100 million people, but I think the government is taking really good actions till now. So I'll be glad to hear any questions that anybody want to ask, to explain more if I can. Thank you very much.
Mohammed, thank you very much indeed for that. I mean, it is interesting that in terms of the different things that people were talking about, I mean, Liam, you were mentioning the need for air cargo, and I was thinking, as you were talking, Mohammed, your agricultural sector is one which exports to Europe a lot, and without air cargo working, then that would hurt the agriculture sector in Egypt. And I think ways whereby we can lobby to do more on these areas which will help in both countries. But Mohammed, could you, I may have missed it as you went through, it sounds as though your government, like the UK government, has actually made funds available. I think that I get two questions related to it, just to try and understand. I mean, one, the funding, has it turned up reasonably quickly for companies? And secondly, with the very large informal sector that exists in Egypt, I'm sure, I can't imagine that the government is giving money out in in the informal sector. How is that sort of in real life? How are those things happening in Cairo?
Well, the funds available, yes, the government is giving lots of funds, and I'll also tell you something. Even what's happening for the central bank, most of the private sector was asking to reduce the interest rates. So I think what happened by having this COVID-19, so our government took the quick actions that was the private sector talking about, plus also reduction of cost of energy costs like electricity and natural gas. Plus also funding of export and funding of some available from the central bank and from the government.
We're losing you, Mohammed. You're going to have to repeat that bit. Sorry.
So I repeat from the beginning?
No. Just, if you just rewind about 30 seconds.
Okay. Yeah, I was just talking that the funds available, yes, and the government has took quick actions, but what the private sector has been asking a long time ago of reducing the interest rate, which they took it as a very quick and surprising action of this 3% of the interest rate. Also reducing the energy cost, because the more they reduce energy, the more you attract more business and keeping the business running and healthy. And so they reduced the electricity cost and reduced the natural gas cost. And I think they will even put a plan for 5 years plan as price concerning the electricity and natural gas. So this will also give more secure image for any private sector, any local sector dealing in this business. Concerning the informal sector, yes, we have a very big informal sector. I think, in my opinion, without specific numbers, but it's almost 50%. But the government will not support the business of the informal sector. But what I mean informal is the labor that works in the informal sector and the labor that works as seasonal labor, which is mainly in the tourism sector and mainly in the construction sector. So what's going on is in the tourism sector, the government is supporting these sectors by giving them money of only 5% interest rate, which is almost nothing in the Egyptian market, loan just to pay the labor fees and to keep them living until business is back again, so we don't have a collapse in the community. Second thing concerning the construction, the government has paid a lot of the construction sector dues to keep them running and to keep them to keep the business running and to keep the companies running. So no one from this construction sector will be laid out or President Sisi ordered that is to put more local projects to keep businesses running and to keep the economy
up. Thank you for that, Mohammed. Now we've started to get some questions in on the Q&A, and we have someone, Liam, is actually interested in VAT, and so you obviously said something interesting about tax, but I think it's the postponement and avoiding payments they'd like you to expand on, if you will, please.
The VAT is one of.
Mohammed, it was a question for Liam. I
Okay.
think it's someone from Cairo who's looking to pick up on the idea.
Yeah, so Mohammed Khalid, who's managing partner at BDO, just wanted me to explain a little further about the postponed VAT accounting. to be clear, this isn't about avoidance of tax. It's about the delaying the payment of VAT. So in the UK, the only tax that we collect at the point of arriving in the country is import VAT. All other taxes are paid, recorded by, they're paid each quarter to the government on a VAT return. So the company would calculate how much they have sold in goods and how much VAT they've collected, and they would remit that to the government. So what postponed VAT accounting does is, for those companies that are VAT registered with the government, they will, from January the 1st next year, be able to account for the VAT that is due on imported goods, and where VAT is due on those goods and duty payments, they will account for them in their company records, and they'll remit that VAT and duty due for payment to the government in the next VAT return in the next quarter. Now, this will really help cash flow for companies who are already trading with the rest of the world, but it removes the impact of VAT on goods arriving from the European Union after the end of our transition period, which is a really critical thing for traders in the UK, who currently do not pay VAT, as you can imagine, on goods arriving in the United Kingdom from the rest of the EU today. If we didn't have this change, they would be liable for that VAT payment immediately. And so that's what it's about. I know that Mr. Khalid was really interested in whether this is a policy that the Egyptian government may consider. And of course, by putting these processes in place, it can be a significant encouragement for companies to make sure that they are registered for payment of VAT, that they keep good records, and therefore can be trusted by your authorities to delay the payment of import VAT. So I would say it's a very positive thing, and I would encourage that thinking. Thank you.
We've got another question in from Matthew Ball, which is with reference to the move towards electronic signatures around. And I think that this is a question for both of you, gentlemen. So, Mohammed, you touched on the fact that your government is being enthusiastic about moving towards acceptance of more electronic confirmation. And I'll come back to you, Liam, on this. You raised it.
Hello?
We're hearing you.
Yeah, we hear you. Sorry, Mohammed, is the progress on more towards electronic signatures being accepted in Egypt? You said that the meetings and Zoom meetings were being accepted. Is there more happening on electronic signatures?
Actually, I think this is one of the main moves and main things that we gained from COVID-19, which is electronic meetings and electronic signatures, and even take these meetings and all that, and that wasn't used before. So by taking this action, it will take us and will lead us, think in the future for more electronic connection businesses. And this also will take the government that we have to take more actions in how to make e-payments everywhere. And because we found out that e-payment is the only solution to put in action businesses which would be affected by cash businesses. So yes, it's a very good move, and yes, even for the government, they make now, even the Prime Minister is making his meetings with the cabinet now on Zoom or Teams or all this kind of connections. So this is, I think, is one of the gains, and also it's not an option right now in the future. It will take more of infrastructure needed for that, and more of companies to be attracted to all markets to cover this sector of all e-payments and online business and all that.
Thank you for that. I think it probably also reinforces Liam's earlier point about it can be attractive to the government if people go on to electronic exchange, because it does force everyone to do everything in a very open and transparent way. So, Liam, you raised this point. Would you like to add something to it earlier?
And Matthew raises an extension of the point I was making around legalization of documents, which typically goods leaving the UK would have to, the paperwork would need to go to the embassy for certain goods. Certain of the goods the paperwork would be moved by the Chamber of Commerce to the embassy for legalization, sometimes to a solicitor for legalization, and via the solicitor to the embassy and back again. And this all can take a number of days, sometimes weeks to have processed, depending on the country and the embassy. But right now we have a number of the embassies in the UK are simply closed to this legalization of documents. So we've had to get round that by, in some cases, arranging for legalization in the country of destination, the country of import.
At risk of getting you out of the general to the specific, one of the big roles of the chamber, the Egyptian British Chamber, is actually dealing with the certification and legalization of documents here in the UK. We work with the consulate to get that done, and it's the chambers, the individual local chambers around the country that send their documentation to us, and we get it sorted. You may be interested that actually since the start of the lockdown, we've been operating at roughly 50% of our previous level. And frankly, I've been quite surprised, because when I go out in the streets and I look at the country, and of course, you know, at my age, I don't go out very much, but the place is dead. And the fact that we're actually doing 50% of the volume that we used to do, or that we would normally do, we've also noticed in this last week, the volume is just beginning to pick up. So for any of the smaller companies around the UK who are considering trying to trade with Egypt, the facilities are still open, and the consulate is still working in the UK, and we're able to get the documentation certified and to go across to Egypt. So sorry to interrupt you on that one, but although you're right about the generality and the specific of Egypt, it's not a challenge that we're actually still able to do the job we were doing.
Pointed out. Yeah.
We have another question which came in, and I think, Liam, you can probably answer this, because Matt Hancock, I think, was very good about answering the question with one of his public statements yesterday. And the question that we've got come in is, what is the UK doing about tourism? I suspect we have to say this, from an Egyptian perspective, I don't think this probably looks like good news, but would you like to explain what you think the government position is?
Well, I mean, the government position is that the tourism industry is, likely to really be shut down for quite some time. If we're talking here about tourism from the UK into Egypt, then I think that Mr. Sewidi's words earlier about this being, at least 1 year or more away from recovery, may be more accurate, because, of course, there are two factors at play. One is what the government says you can do, and then the second one is the behaviours of people and their preparedness to go on holiday, and to suspect, to travel outside of the UK. So that behavioural change, I think may take some more time. And I certainly, I think the cruise line companies will have some concerns, as well as those charter firms. I heard this morning that TUI, who are very active in your country, are talking about further layoffs and not recruiting at all for this season. They would typically recruit 75,000 additional workers around the globe, and they're talking about zero recruitment for this holiday season coming up. So I don't think the future for tourism and hospitality is going to be very, very bright. Other sectors will likely come back faster. But, you know, I do think this will come down to behaviours. Businesses will get back into flying and moving much faster than tourists will. You know, the other factor, of course, is that the people who go on holiday, who are workers, may have less money available if they've been furloughed workers, they've taken mortgage holidays, they've lost their jobs, and the like. So, you know, there are multiple factors that will impact on the tourist industry. I'm sorry if you're in that industry. I think it's going to be very difficult for quite a long time.
Okay, I'm going to try and crack on so we get through this. Now, Mohammed, there is a question which I think probably only you can answer, which is to do with the Egyptian export subsidy program. And can you tell us, is it actually still functioning? And I think there's someone out there with a particular query because they're actually saying, what about the arrears? So, can you tell us anything about the Egyptian export subsidy program?
Yes, the Egyptian export subsidy is still running, and the government is paying the old dues now. They reach 30% for all customers. This is the action taken right now, and the Prime Minister and he promised that most of it will be paid by the end of this year, or maybe maximum next year. So they will close what they call it, the old dues for all companies, plus readjusting the program, because the new program that has been signed on mid of 2019, and we as a federation, we didn't like it a lot, and but the government said that they will readjust it because it was not very effective. Plus, there was a very major point that the tax authorities asked for, which is you have to give clearance of tax dues before getting your subsidy, which did actually stop all subsidies. So the Prime Minister said this had to be cancelled, and actually yes, it has been cancelled from the documentation that has to be submitted for you to get this. That's why it's now clear. Most of the companies paying payroll, they get their payments, they get the dues, and yes, the program is running, and there will be some adjustments to make it more easy, more effective for all companies. And that's why the minister, which is very effective, by the way, Dr. Niveen Gama, she made last week the new expert councils, plus increasing even the number of councils to make it more at ease, and she's giving personal follow-up from herself, because that's the only way I think that we can cover shortage of having happening in the market from the tourism sector.
Right, sorry, I keep forgetting to unmute. Thank you, Mohammed. Thank you for that. We've got a couple of other questions coming in, but one that I would actually like to throw at Liam, that's what I think answer, is some of the smaller companies that we've been in touch with have real concern with their insurers in the UK about their business interruption insurance, and this is clearly sort of one of those things. People thought they were potentially insured for problems, and it's difficult. So what are the British Chambers of Commerce doing on that one?
Well, I did already mention the work that we've done on credit insurance and the coverage that the government is about to announce by the end of this month, and that will be a scheme that will in fact provide the insurers with a fallback position, if you like, with government underwriting credit insurance at risk. Beyond that, we're aware of business interruption insurance policies, or policies that companies thought provided coverage for business interruption in certain circumstances, and then discovering that in fact they didn't have the coverage that they thought they had in place. I think we all can suffer from this when we change policies to save a few pounds and discover that actually we haven't compared apples with apples. I think for traders, they need to fall back in those positions, fall back on looking at their policy and understanding what policy they're buying. That's been compounded, I think, by the withdrawal of business interruption clauses from some policies and some insurers not accepting new business. I'd also say for some businesses, force majeure, of course, has been triggered in contracts where that applies, and that does little to help in terms of business interruption insurance policy. Very often does very little to help that. So I think you need to look at your contracts, look at what coverage was within the contract that you entered into for supply or sale, as well as be looking at your policies. And if you haven't had to trigger business interruption claims, look now at what you have got and what coverage you have in place, and make sure that you have that in future. I think it will be hard to find in cases, and it may be expensive. I don't know if that answers the question, Ian, but it's as much as I know about it.
And it seems to me that some people we appear to have some insurance companies who appear to be seeking a lot of wriggle room in the precise wording, and I know something the FCA, the Financial Conduct Authority, I think is actually looking at some of these and the hope. And so I do hope the British Chambers as a body will actually sort of go in and help that for the if you've got any insurance companies as members, apart from them, you win back for everyone else, then that would be good. Mohammed, one of the questions that's come up, I think we've heard about tourism could potentially be tough, but do you have any view about the travel restrictions interfering with international trade?
Yes. Well, the fear, yes, from tourism and international trade, I think it's everywhere, because if you see this year, most of the international fairs has been cancelled, and it's not even the conferences and all that. So our attitude should be changed, and I think the change that we'll be facing is that everything will be online. Yesterday, actually, Minister Hisham Tawfiq, we signed with him a very important agreement, which is, I think, the first electronic site for the government to put all the products from the industry of the private sector, and they will do a lot of marketing for it, and it's going to be a page or a site that anyone can buy Egyptian products on that, especially the small and medium-sized companies, which they cannot do their exports by themselves. So this has been signed. It will be effective after the feast, for free for all Egyptian companies to put the products on this site, and it will be opened especially for the African market through Al Nasr company. So I think this changes we should face. Saying that, or they heard that the government has stopped all the key bilateral projects between Egypt and the other countries, which is not true. The government has not stopped any bilateral projects or agreements or all that. It's the other way around. Egypt is looking for more projects in the market, more businesses in the market to keep things running. And actually, luckily enough to say that we have a big local demand, who still didn't cover the needs of the people, and still the cash is inside the country. So even the government also has declared that they're going to build this year more 250,000 housing for middle class sector, which is still ongoing business. No, so the government is spending more on projects. All bilateral projects is going on. They didn't stop or postpone any bilateral projects, just to make it clear for everyone.
Look, that's very encouraging. And look, I do realise I have allowed this to run on a little longer than we originally intended. So thank you everyone who's put in the Q&A. Thank you for your input on that. And thank you for bearing with us and coming on. Biggest thank you of all to you, Mohammed, for joining us today and giving us, I think, a very open and real insight into Egypt. And Liam, a big thank you to you for, the equivalent from the UK end to share this with, both your UK friends and across to the friends you don't know yet over in Egypt. I think my closing remark on this, which is, well, I was going to say it's partly COVID, partly Brexit, but one of the things I've always been told by my friends in Egypt is that, as the UK, if we get stuck with our free trade deal with with Europe, don't forget Egypt has already got a free trade agreement with the EU. So, improving that partnership, and we're all within the same time zone. I think both countries can do a lot more together as we go forward. So, look, thank you. Those of you who I can't see, thank you for tuning in today and listening. Liam, thank you. Mohammed, thank you. I think it's time to go. So, thanks all.
It's been my pleasure. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Thank you very much all. It was my pleasure.
Thank you.
Thank you.